The morning session is on kind of mental health and professional opportunities, focusing on COVID. I'll give the disclaimer that none of our panelists are mental health professionals, but we thought it would be good to have a space to discuss the challenge of this year, the challenge of being a PhD or early career switcher in general. And as I said to them in my email, where I'm from in the world in Northern Ireland, we'd call it how to keep your head. So, you know, keeping just how to look after yourself and them to talk to their own experiences through their careers and pressures and things that they've spoken about. So I'll hand over to them. So Nick, over to you first. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for the invitation. As a sort of fellow Northern Ireland person, I can relate to kind of keeping your head idea. It's good. Yeah, so I mean, there's quite a, I mean, it's quite a sort of broad brief to talk about mental health and professional opportunity. So I'm going to I'll talk through a few of the things that certainly sort of advice that I've been given, and obviously, I think in many ways, I mean, obviously COVID makes life and the particular challenges around sort of completing a PhD, but also sort of seeking professional opportunities even harder at times. But I think that the main things probably remain sort of very similar. I mean, I remember the piece of advice I was given when I first started my PhD was it will feel a bit like one of those oscilloscopes. So it goes in waves in terms of how you feel about things. And you'll have moments of pure elation when everything seems to be working and going well, and others of pure misery. And I'd be interested to see if my colleagues on the panel had a kind of sort of similar experience. But I suppose the point is that it's perfectly normal to go through that gamut of emotions. And I think the challenge from a mental health perspective and a well-being perspective is how you're then able to kind of think about and manage that. So hopefully the kind of experiences I can share will be of use for that. And the first thing I would say is there's nothing like doing a PhD to really bring out your inner demons, no matter how mentally strong you may be. I think it's because it's not just another degree. It's something much deeper and much more profound in terms of what you're doing. So it's normal to feel ups and downs, and there's nothing wrong if you do. It's actually more about how you then think about how you manage that. And I think it's very important then that you don't feel that you have to make big strides, big progress every day. I think there will be days and even weeks when you don't feel like you're moving forward, but that is part of it. I mean, I had what I like to call kind of my little PhD family, a group of us who started our PhDs at the same time at UEA way back in the dim and distant past, and we would joke that really, particularly when we were writing up, if we had one good day of writing every 4 or 5, we felt like we were making progress, and that was kind of fairly normal. And then you'd have other days when you would write and then you would delete it and you'd write more and you'd delete more and you'd have a meeting with your supervisor and it may not be the most productive thing. And that's kind of just part and parcel. So it's kind of being able to roll with it. And I think another bit of advice then that was very useful is that you're not aiming for perfection. Essentially, when you're doing your PhD research, you're really just trying to pass an exam. If you happen to produce something that is groundbreaking or epoch changing in the process, fantastic. But I think many of us don't. But that's fine. What we're contributing our little bit of new knowledge to our field, and that's absolutely fine. And think of this as your first word on the subject rather than necessarily your last. And I think if you think of it like that, it becomes a bit more manageable. It gives you a bit more freedom and takes the weight off your shoulders a bit. So the 3 big things then I would say in terms of looking after your kind of mental health and well-being, which I think are even more important at the moment in this kind of in the COVID era. Yeah, the first one is to have a good support network. It's really important to have family and friends around you who are separate from your work, who can help to keep you grounded and can take you out of it and take you away from your work. That becomes harder the closer you come to submission and when you're writing up and it's kind of all consuming. But I think it's very useful just to be able to talk to people who have nothing to do with your work, who can help you think about, you keep that perspective, if you like, on where it sits in the bigger scheme of things. I actually had one of my PhD friends once came into the office one morning, it was about 6 months before we were due to hand in, and he said, "Do you know what? When the sun explodes and the solar system disappears, none of this is going to matter," which was, I think it was meant as a kind of a positive thing, but it was all kind of like, great, thanks. Now we've got some big kind of, existential crisis on top of everything else. But I see where he's coming from, and that kind of needs the second thing is it's very useful to have a group of early career colleagues or PhD colleagues, if you like, your kind of little network, your family, who people you've kind of maybe studying at the same sort of period of time with, who will understand exactly what it's like, and these are good people to share your work with and to talk through your problems with, because everybody will be wrestling with a very similar set of challenges and come at them from slightly different ways, and there's a bond that builds up between you and your PhD family, I think, in that sense. And then the final point in terms of support network is the professional networks like UACES. These are great opportunities to share and to listen to other people's experiences, and also just to find out that essentially whatever you may be feeling is perfectly normal, and actually it's great that you can bond on that basis. So that's the first main point. The second point I would say is, if you need to, ask for help, and by help I mean, seeking, not necessarily from your supervisor or whatever, but there will always be times when it will feel like it's a bit too much. And there could be perfectly good reasons, because we all have lots and lots going on in our lives, lots of other things happening, and the PhD can really kind of add to the kind of the levels of stress and tension. So don't be afraid to talk to someone professional if you need to. I made fulsome use of our counselling, university counselling service at UEA when I as part of it, because there were certain things that came up when I was doing my work and that really challenged me, and and I was very pleased in the acknowledgements of my final PhD when I submitted it to include the name of my counsellor, because he really helped me put a lot of things in perspective and think about things in a slightly different way, and I think that was very, very useful. Would I have completed my PhD without him? I think I probably would, but maybe it helped make it, make sure I was able to do it when I did it. And so the third point then is to really take care of yourself. It's all right to take time off from your work. Your brain is going to carry on working on your PhD, even if you're not sitting at your desk anyway, even if only subconsciously, and that can be quite good to step away from it. So it's fine to build in sort of downtime. It's important that you do. To that regard, I thoroughly recommend Netflix and The Queen's Gambit, at least for 7 hours of your life. Make sure you have at least one day a week where you do no work. Spend time with family, go outside, just so you've got some downtime to look forward to, and find a routine that works for you to the extent possible. I know a lot of people have family commitments as well, so you're building your research work in and around that. But make sure you're, particularly these days, you're able to take exercise if you can, and that you've got fun things to look forward to, even if it's kind of drinks with friends on Zoom. There's so much happening on Zoom. This, obviously, I mean, quite often it's quite nice not to be on it at all, but it's really important to kind of to make sure you're not just living in your own head all the time. And if possible, if the time allows, have something else in your life that you're passionate about, whether it's running, it's your kids, whatever it happens to be, painting, writing, creative fiction, whatever. Just have something that you know is nothing to do with your research, and you may not be able to put lots of time in it, but be able to have that extra thing in there can be very, very, very useful. I don't know how much time I got left. I'll just talk briefly about professional opportunities now, if that's all right. Which is feels a bit. I mean, it was depressing when I was doing my PhD, and I don't think it's changed a great deal, because the academic career path is difficult. I spent a lot of time both during and after my PhD doing short-term temporary contracts, and it's really just unfortunately it was a question of just taking up the opportunities as they come along. But there are positive things that you can do. So thinking about how you can package and repackage yourself in terms of the work you're doing. So do you consider yourself an IR scholar at the moment? Or if not, could that work for you? Is there a way of thinking about how your work might fit into IR, or are you a comparativist? So can you present yourself as a variety of different things on your CV and when you're applying for jobs? And it's worth just stepping back and thinking about the breadth of your experience and the research work you do within that, and how that enables you to think about how you present yourself. Can you, for example, really emphasize your methodological expertise? That's really important to a lot of universities at the moment. They're looking for people with good research method skills, because that's one of the sort of more challenging sides of things that needs to be taught, particularly at postgraduate level. So can you present that as one of your strengths? Look for opportunities to build your dissertation supervisory experience. I could tell you, for example, at UCL, where I work, we have in political science, we always look for additional dissertation supervisors come summer, and we offer kind of contractors on an as and when basis. Now, this is not a massive amount of work, but it's really useful to fill that potential gap in your CV, to be able to say, not only have I done my research, I've got some teaching experience, I've also got supervision experience. And I think a lot of universities find that really, really valuable. So it might be worth thinking about getting in touch with, you know, your own university or other universities nearby and say, are you looking for dissertation supervisors? This is what I can offer, and see what's available. And think about what you offer beyond academia. For example, to the practitioner community, is your research work, I mean, I work in EU foreign policy, for example, but is your research work presentable for lunchtime seminars to, I don't know, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office or the Home Office or someone like that? Are there opportunities to work with think tanks or research institutes on a freelance basis? It's really about building up that kind of breadth of expertise and the portfolio you can offer, and building connections with institutions and organizations who may, you know, who could then come back to you in the future if more permanent opportunities arise. And can you turn your experience and expertise into something more broader? I mean, one of our colleagues, Dorina Boltag, has created this incredible sort of workshops and support for basically to kind of help sort of women academics become more professionally focused, and she's created that from sort of recognition that there was a gap in the market in terms of the advice that she could give. So it's really about helping female academics develop their career profiles and really look at new areas. And just two final things very quickly: take opportunities as they come along, but bear in mind it is okay to say no. And sometimes there's so much pressure, you think, I've got to get a job, I've got to get this, I've got to take this. If I don't take this contract, I won't be offered another one. And it can be very hard when you're starting out to say no. But if it's too much, if you feel that you're not being treated well and with respect, which you have every right to, then it's all right to say no. And on that regard, the final piece of advice I would say is join a union. Join the UCU, because you need someone to look out for your interests, particularly when you're just starting out, sort of professionally. And membership rates are very cheap for kind of early career researchers and young academics, and they also have lots and lots of resources on mental health and professional development. So that's a very worthwhile thing to do. I'd be very happy to answer any questions later on about my own personal experiences, but that's all I want to say for the moment. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions later on. If we pass on now to Patrick, just to keep going for time.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nick, for these comments, because it saves me a little bit of work, because some of my comments would have been the same. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. First of all, indeed, I'm not a psychologist, but there's some stuff I can talk about from my own work experience, and also some of the stuff that I do, which you hopefully will find useful. I actually prepared a few slides. I'm not going to show all of them to you, but I thought it would just make my life a little bit easier. I want to talk to you, first of all, about my work, then about the advice that I would usually give, and then how my perspective on this has changed quite a lot during the last couple of weeks and months. And just end with a couple of things which more or less overlap with some of the points that Nick mentioned as well. You know, my work is nowadays, you know, spread over different things. Like many of you, I'm teaching, but there's also a lot of organizational stuff that I'm engaged with. And I'm not going to talk about all of this, but I do a lot of work with both students and staff in terms of supervision. For students, that's indeed undergraduate thesis and graduate thesis supervision, a little bit of PhD supervision too. But I also coordinate part of the staff training at our university. And part of that is also engaged with how to make people's life a little bit easier, and how to also think of all the challenges that come with all the stuff that's coming our way and all the expectations that our bosses have of us. And some of the things that we've been talking about in that context in the past is simply how to plan your time and how to build, and indeed, as Nick already mentioned, time also for relaxation. Some of the advice that I usually give is a little bit like this, in particular also with regard to my MA students and also the PhD students that I work with. One thing that Nick already mentioned is there's more to life than writing a thesis. Although it is an important part of your life, but it's good indeed to spend some of your time on doing other things. That is also my second advice. Think about building a dynamic profile. It is great that you're an expert in a very tiny aspect of research, like I am, but it's also good that you are able to do other stuff. And Nick already mentioned teaching or supervision, maybe, all kinds of different things. And in that sense, my advice normally is also embrace new opportunities. Indeed, don't embrace too many, but they can also help you to build a profile and to also help you to stay sane during the time of writing your thesis. I finished mine over 10 years ago, my PhD dissertation, and I just remember that some of it was really stressful, but I also was advised back then by my supervisor, do some other stuff as well, because it will help you to stay sane. And I think, like Nick, I also would say that, doing something else doesn't mean you're not thinking about your thesis. But it's also indeed good, I think, for professional opportunities. And I borrowed Rachel's words from the email here for this slide, keeping your head in professional opportunities, because I think it was really good, well put. So doing new things also allows you to build a new skill set. Nick mentioned that already. It's also nice to talk to others about the great stuff that you're doing, your PhD, but also all the other things that you're doing. I think it's also good to show to others what you're good at beyond being an expert in your field of expertise. And I would also say engage more broadly with the public or with fellow academics, indeed by being a member of UACES. That's just one way of doing it. But think, for instance, about writing blogs. If you've done something great in terms of a course that you've taught, you could, for instance, send your blog to Active Learning in Political Science, which publishes great stuff, which helps us all. Now, this is what I normally would say, but we're living in different times, and I just want to show you my agenda for this week, because I've gone completely mental. I'm very happy that today is my first day of relaxation in a sense, because I've been teaching on campus, online. I've been teaching in hybrid sessions. I had meetings online on campus, working from home, working at the faculty, which we are able to do at the moment. I have my own office, so it's quite easy. And based on this, I would completely change my advice, because I don't know about you, but this constant switching between online meetings, offline meetings, hybrid meetings, where I see some of my students and colleagues in a room, but the rest is on the screen. I need to look at two things at the same time. That's really changed my perspective on some of this, particularly in these times. And for these times, my advice that I gave you just earlier, I would change that a little bit. So again, with keeping your head and professional opportunities, I would no longer say this anymore. I would say this applies to normal times, but these are not normal times. Hopefully they'll return soon. I would now advise you to try to do less, not more. I find, and I'm quite sure that you're experiencing this too, that there's so much coming our way right now, and these online meetings and switching between online and offline, it's taking such a big toll in terms of my energy, that I simply myself also find less time to do stuff. I haven't been able to really work on my research. Last Friday was the first day in, I think, 5 weeks that I had time to actually look at my research. Nick already mentioned planning more time for relaxation. Go out for a walk. If you're running, I run a lot. I try to go for a run at least 5 times a week. I don't always manage at the moment, but I try to. Nick also already mentioned the third one, right? Meet your friends and colleagues for coffee and drinks online. It's not the same, but 2 weeks ago, I met up with a good friend of mine who's in Bergen, Norway, working on research, and we do some stuff together in terms of research, but we're also simply good friends. And we always said, nah, we're not going to do this online, but we actually had two hours, which was really fun, and we had a lot of stuff to talk about, and it just really was a really good end of my working week as such. So earlier I said also, if you think of professional opportunities, if you do more and show that you have a broad profile, this is helpful. but then making choices will also help you to build your new skill sets. It's a little bit contradictory perhaps, but if you spend a little bit more time on some of the things, you also get better at it. But I think also showing to others how you are keeping sane in these times, I think it can be really helpful. Even when someone has not turned their mic off, even when you know, when normal times resume, and hopefully there will be some time 2021, I think it's good to others to show how you are able to plan your time and keep sane, not just in these times, but also in the future. Because if you want to end up in a job in academia, you'll get all these different things that you'll need to do, and people will, my experience is that people will like you more if you are able to show that you can relax and can stay on top of things, and that you're also not afraid to say no, as Nick also already just mentioned. One thing has stayed the same. Here too, I would say write about this experience, because it's a nice way to sort of, you know, just empty your head. But here too, I would say, I think we can all learn from each other. That's the nice thing also of this meeting today. I think we all do these things in different ways, and that's good. And we all have different things that we do to relax. But I think it's also good to share this among each other, because I think it will make our life a little bit easier now, but also when life resumes to some kind of normality next year. I'm going to leave it there.
Fab, thank you very much, Patrick. That's a good idea about writing about it. We do have the UACES Graduate Forum blog, so if anyone thinks that that's a great idea, I'm sure the committee would love to hear from them, because that sounds like a good use of that platform. Okay, so if we continue on with our next speaker, Toni.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here. So I should say it's a bit of a caveat. Like everyone has said, I'm not a mental health expert, but with almost everything else, I kind of try to overplan this, and then I realized that kind of defeated the purpose of this conversation. So I've sort of left all the mess in, threw that out and left all the mess in. So just bear with me for the next 10 minutes. I think both Nick and Patrick have said a lot of things I would usually say, and I just found myself nodding and sort of was thinking, you know, what else can I say about mental health? And I think I wanted to sort of talk about the conditions that perhaps enable or issues around mental health, so that we understand where we are before we sort of get to the solutions. And I mean, as I say, I fully agree with those solutions. So I think it's important to sort of always think about experiences. And when I got invited to this panel, I said, are you sure I'm the right person to talk about this? Because I don't have any expertise in this area. And, you know, I always tell people, right, like, don't talk about stuff you don't know about. So people are way more qualified to actually talk about this. But at the same time, I felt, okay, maybe my qualification comes from experience. So I need to take a bit of a step back. In a few weeks, it will be 10 years since I defended my PhD, which was very, I think I'd forgotten in the context of the apocalypse. And then the other day I remembered because a picture came up on Facebook, and that really shook me, because first of all, it was like, you're super old. But secondly, you know, I think I sort of relived a bit of that trauma. I was doing a PhD student as an international immigrant and Black woman in an academy that doesn't really want any of those things. So most of you know how much it costs to be an international student doing a PhD when you're self-funded. I was lucky that in my university in Edinburgh, there weren't two Black women in my cohort, and of course we became friends. But also I think going back to Nick's point about, you know, finding that cohort that you move with is really important. And so my cohort were the people I shared my office with and the people who were registered for the PhD at the same time as we are. And today we're still the best of friends, very, very close to those friends. And one of the reasons why that's important is because although I do think, again, as Nick said, you should engage with, as I used to say, normal people. You need someone who understands what you're going through. The PhD, I know that people say this all the time, but I think it's absolutely true, that it's lonely. It's not lonely in the sense that there are people sharing an office with you, but in this sort of a dual-edged quest for originality, you end up being the person who knows your project the most. So nobody is going through what you're going through at the precise moment that you're going through. And so for that reason, I think it's quite useful to identify that cohort. But I also think in my context, I identified my cohort, which I think was very useful. But the fact that I was an international student and self-funded put certain restrictions on me that a lot of people on this call might not have. It meant I had to finish my PhD in 3 years because my parents were shelling out 12 grand per annum on fees. And that's sort of minus living expenses. But it also meant that although I was in my PhD full time and I wanted to finish in 3 years, I was also working full time. So going back to the point of, don't do everything, I think it's also important to acknowledge that we don't always have that choice. I didn't have that choice because I was consistently an international student, and because I had just gone straight through, I didn't have any sort of personal savings of my own. But at the same time, I think it's also important to understand that it's that precisely that context that can engender sort of those mental health concerns that we are now able to talk about. Interestingly enough, I would say the thing that was most disruptive to my 3 years wasn't necessarily the sort of doing 3 jobs and doing a PhD, but a particular dynamic within my office, shall we say. I'll tell you that story another day. But the point is, there's a lot of things that can then crop up that add to the pressures that are already there, because I was just sort of slowly going, just managing my life, just like Patrick had that table of everything that he did. I was that person. Like I always laid out everything at the beginning of the week. I ticked all the boxes of everything that Rowena Murray says about Wright authoring a PhD, that Patrick Dunleavy says about authoring a PhD. I did everything. And then in your last year, something happens that totally derails you for 3 months. What I want to say is that's okay. That's okay. And in my case, they had the implication of I submitted my PhD 3 months later than I wanted to. And when I say that today, people are like, "You're being ridiculous." Like, you still finish it in 3 years. But for me, at that point, it was such a big deal because I'd planned everything. And I'd done everything right. I'd done everything I was supposed to do. My supervisors were happy, etc., etc. I think it's also important, now as somebody who mentors people, as somebody who is sort of middling career, to recognize that there are intersecting oppressions to sort of being within this particular academic space. As I said before, as a Black woman who was an immigrant, this space isn't necessarily for me. And I sort of, I found my people in my particular cohort, because there were other immigrants. There were people who, we were in our particular cohort that we were outsiders in a lot of ways. Again, it's not always like that for a lot of people. And here's why doing something external to your particular department or faculty might be important, right? So Nick already said, join a union. And sort of join a union that sort of speaks to certain aspects, certain groups, with subgroups within the union that speak to certain parts of your identity. Join, like, I don't want to say clubs because that sounds very undergrad, but you can join other areas that are reflective of your particular interests. In my case, I just went to the gym a lot, and that was good enough for me, right? Not so much now, but back then it really worked. It really worked well. I would also say that a support network in the professional context is quite important. And in this context, I would actually suggest diversifying. So I consider UACES my home because my very first international conference was through UACES, because 2008 UACES was in Edinburgh, and I've been a member since. So what defines me as an academic is quite linked to UACES, but I'm also a member of BISA because also international studies. And here I actually want to re-emphasize Nick's point that oftentimes, especially in the UK context, we are kind of siloed into particular themes, right? So you are an IR scholar in conflict in a particular area, and God forbid you actually do another subject. And I've been lucky because by meeting people, I've been able to co-author, work with other people, expand my knowledge. And of course, that only happened after the PhD because I only did the PhD for 3 years. But I think perhaps while you're thinking about your thesis now, it might be useful to sort of think about how you branch out in that way. I think that certainly helps in terms of when it comes time to then deal with the harsh realities of the fact that there are unfortunately no jobs. And you might not find that perfect job that you're looking for. I mean, we all know that no job is perfect, right? So I know that everybody who's on this call is probably quite pragmatic. But it really pains me to say that it's even more dire than we might think it is. And yes, I think this is the perfect moment to blame the neoliberal university. It has absolutely nothing to do with people's expertise and what it is that they're capable of, but it has to do with the system. Unfortunately, I can't fix the system. I can only sort of talk you through how to better navigate it. So I wanted to move on to now to sort of thinking about how to fix it for yourself. First of all, a lot of this issue, I want to say that once the PhD is over, like when I was in my PhD, I always thought once I finish those 3 years, life will be better, right? That it will always be better. And so it was willing to adopt some bad habits because life will be better after those 3 years. I'm sorry to say that's not the case, and my biggest mental health crisis, perhaps coupled with the apocalypse, happened this year, and I had to formally sign off work, which I'd never done before. I've never taken my full stretch of leave before, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. That when you, especially for people maybe in their final year who are sort of thinking of what comes next. I think it is important to acknowledge again that we're not all in the same position. For me, not only did I have to finish in 3 years, I also knew that as an international person, in a way my career future was dependent on being able to find a job immediately and next, and I've been really lucky in that. But precisely because the academic space is not made for me, I've often tried to prove myself 2.5 times over, right? And that, on top of everything else that's happened this year, just ended up not being good. So after I left my PhD thinking, oh yeah, now I can stop being an insomniac, that didn't really happen because your body doesn't just go back to the before time. So that's something I've had to manage. And then this year, we kind of threw that out because everybody's working at sort of 120% load, whether it's teaching or not. So if I could go back, the one thing I would have told myself to be strict on is that don't pick up those big habits of overwork, because if you keep saying next, there is not a next. Like you're basically, I mean, I hate to say this, jumping from, the frying pan into the fire. If you're sort of thinking about the sort of pressures that come with being an academic. And so it really, you have to start to inculcate those better habits sooner. And just to wrap up, I've said to a few people that when this year is over, we'll all write a book about it sooner or later. That it's not going to necessarily be a book that says COVID, the year the world ended or something. That's my tentative title, but I think, we have to be willing to sort of build and accept the fact that this has been such an unusual time, and a time that doesn't just, doesn't just affect you because, you're not able to go to field work. There were times in the middle of the year that I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my God, what happens if someone that I love, if my gran gets ill from COVID, or, you know, I watch the news incessantly because the death rates keep rising up. Those things affect people. And it's very difficult to articulate that. You know, if you go to your supervision meeting and your supervisor is like, so what have you done the last time you met? You know, you usually wouldn't just go on and say, well, I've been obsessing about the death rates around COVID in the UK for the last month. And let me tell you, it doesn't look good. And if it's not COVID, it's the climate crisis. I mean, I might be projecting here, but I think it's okay to leave space for the fact that these things might affect you and to try to deal with them on those terms, that it's very normal to be able to do that. So I'm going to keep quiet now. I'm happy to answer the questions when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toni, and thanks for keeping the mess in, because I think it's important to talk about the mess and not sanitize all of our experiences. So thank you for doing that. Kathryn, we hand over to you and then we can get into discussion when you're finished.
Super, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this event. A bit like my panelists as well, I thought, am I really the right person to be speaking about mental health and professional opportunities? And I planned something as Toni did, and I've basically rewritten it as everybody has spoken, so and rejigged it round. I want to talk a little bit in particular, just the beginning of kind of about the mental health scenario, and it ties in, I think, with what Toni and Patrick and Nick have already talked about, is that a PhD is what you do, it's not who you are. And those lines get blurred so much. And I think it's really important to have kind of one day a week where you do nothing with regards to your PhD. It's very important to take time off, and it's very difficult to have that discipline at times, but it is really, really crucial. I often found, and I still find, that when I take time off, I'm far more productive. I write much better. I write much quicker. And it can be something as simple as take the dog for a walk and then come back and come to the computer. So that's what I try and tend to do every morning. And if I don't do that every morning, I'm just really grumpy and not very good first thing, because it really does allow me to kind of just clear my head and think about the best things for the day. It's something that I wasn't as strict on as a PhD student, admittedly. And it's something I have learned to do a lot more as I've kind of got to grips with the job that is working in academia. I also think as well, and this is something that's not specific to COVID, but I think it's very important, is I think we all need to learn to say no a lot more. This is something that I'm trying to integrate a lot more into my nature to get a better work-life balance, because I think success is often built on that habit of saying yes to opportunities that come our way. So we're hungry for those chances to prove ourselves. You know, there is a very, very small minority of people that, you know, study a PhD. We are quite a minority, and we are very, very academic, very driven. And as a consequence, learning to say no is not something that comes naturally to us. And as a consequence, when you keep saying yes, it tends to attract those bigger and better opportunities. But the key challenge then becomes prioritizing those opportunities. So we often try and don't say no because you want to keep your options open. But actually what happens then is that you can kind of, you know, you get a lack of clarity, you can overcommit, and you can actually wind up disappointing people, yourselves, exhausting yourself, and simply failing. And I think it's really, really important that we just kind of take a moment and say, right, I'm going to say no to this. So there's no magic formula, I don't think, for saying no, but I think there's 3 things you can proactively do. I think the first thing we can do is to slow down. And what I mean by slow down is slow down the pace of the interaction or that decision making. Allow you to kind of take the time to say, right, is that the right choice for me? Not merely the choice that kind of alleviates that anxiety of saying no at the time. So I'm thinking of a personal scenario. I've just returned back to work from maternity leave. I was asked to take on a more senior management position within my department. Under normal circumstances, I would have said, yeah, I'll do that, no problem. No, I said, I'm going to take the time. I need a day to think about this. I looked into what the position would be, what it would entail. I spoke to colleagues who had done it. I had spoke to colleagues in other departments, and then I subsequently made the decision to take it on with caveats. And that is something that was a real big learning curve for me. And I think, again, it actually has worked out better, and I'm enjoying the role more than if I had made that very quick decision of going, yeah, it's no problem. The second thing I think then is kind of to recognize that emotional cue. So once you're aware of kind of saying, you know, how you're going to respond, how do you actually feel saying no? I don't like it personally. I don't like saying no, but I think when you're aware of how you feel, you can kind of process things a little bit more. And the third one, I think, is practice. You know, practice saying no. Practice saying no in email, practice saying no out loud. You know, it's an interpersonal skill that you need to develop, but for some reason we don't really do it. And it's a strange one. And I think we all need to do it a little bit more. The conversations that we've had have made me really reflect on my own experience of my PhD. And it's something that I actually don't do very often. A bit like Toni, Toni and I worked in the same department. Toni was appointed while I was doing my PhD, and she became a very, very good friend. And like her, I put myself under immense pressure to complete my PhD within 3 years. And within that 3 years, I also wanted to secure a job. Okay. I planned everything, and I was very successful. I got the PhD completed in 3 years. I also secured at the time a prestigious research associate position at a Russell Group institution before I finished my PhD. I was very proud. My supervisors were proud. The department I studied in was very proud. I remember an email being sent out. But actually, so from an outsider looking in, it was a perfect scenario. I can tell you that the reality of it was far from perfect. It's a conversation for another day, probably on a one-to-one with people. But what got me through that very difficult scenario that I faced professionally was the union, UCU. They were absolutely invaluable, and that's the best membership I continue to pay, on top of UACES, obviously. My kind of unappointed ad hoc mentor, UACES, was absolutely crucial at the time. I was involved with JASER, and my colleagues within JASER were just so supportive, and really kind of gave a shining light on things. And then family and friends. I subsequently left the position. I took a month off, and I actually took a part-time position. It was the best decision I ever made, but at the time I felt like a complete failure. And it's only really now I kind of feel comfortable, some respect, speaking about it. I still get anxiety when I see those people either publishing at conferences, on Twitter, but I'm slowly getting over it. But as I say, that from my personal experience, it was a pretty tough time, actually. And I don't think I ever acknowledged how tough it was. Looking then kind of at professional opportunities, complete kind of 360 on this, is that my advice to kind of early career researchers, PhD students, is I think it's important to get to know the patterns of the academic hiring cycle. We're halfway through the 2021 cycle now. We know the sector is assuming bad news financially, and there is uncertainty. You can't hide it. Universities are modelling everything from, say, drop off in student numbers to more student numbers than usual. So, for example, in my department, we have more student numbers than we anticipated. But I think there are two things in particular you can do immediately to kind of get to grips with this. The first thing I think you can do is pay attention to messages about student recruitment in your field, and across different types of institutions, but also in different countries. These are things that are varying substantially, and I think you need to be familiar with the stances in different disciplines, but also different countries now more than ever, because COVID has impacted, obviously, countries very differently, but also the way higher education is being structured. So again, I'm from Ireland, and I see how things are being done in Ireland in comparison to the UK. It's very, very different. And I imagine that is the case for a lot of countries across Europe, but also even beyond. And that leads me, I think, to the second thing, is that things may be difficult, and there's no doubt about that, but there is hiring going on. Posts need to be filled. People are retiring. People are leaving for other reasons. Teaching needs to be met. So again, taking the example of my own department, we have hired 2 full-time lecturers, 3 associate lecturers, and have an advertisement for 2 other positions, all within the last 3 months. Because basically social distancing and online learning, we need more resource, quite frankly. It's pretty simple. So I think there is, opportunity out there in the immediate instance. Looking ahead then, I think for 2021 and 2022, I think optimism is key. I'm going to be really positive and keep optimistic. Again, I think there's things you can do immediately. The first thing, this is kind of a couple of bullet points, but the first thing is ask yourself, what is your strategy for the year ahead? Okay. I think everyone needs to have a clear plan, which incorporates the difficulties of COVID as well. COVID is there, but everything is not determined by it. It's kind of contextual. And there's things that can apply that are still within your control. The first thing is publish. That's not going to change anything, unfortunately. The more you publish, the better and in those high quality journals, I hate to bang on about it, that is what will secure your position. Think very hard as well about what is missing from your CV and somehow try and work out how you can plug that gap. So again, I think Nick gave the example of giving supervisory support over the summer. Again, could you do some kind of teaching courses or even some online teaching that could plug that gap maybe that is maybe missing? I also think you could do something like arrange to have an affiliation on your CV rather than having a 1-year gap. So have a kind of visiting fellow post at maybe your home institution where you did your PhD if you've moved on. Again, when things were exceptionally difficult, when I went through that difficult period post PhD, that's something that I did. It's still on my CV. And again, it didn't have that gap that I was really, really anxious about at the time. Think as well about what you can do without a job or grant of any kind. It's a really scary thought. But bear in mind that, you have to show progression from your PhD. And I think you can be creative about imagining and planning that career trajectory. So could you do a small pilot project, for example? Some of the difficulties given the nature of our profession is without funding, we can't, we do field research or we can't conduct the interviews we want. But equally, try and use the current situation we're in to your advantage. So, you might not need a visa to go and do something. You might not need the grant application. There's no travel costs. Try and be as, potentially a little bit creative. I know it's tough, but I think there's kind of opportunity there. I also think as well, it's worth considering applying for research funding, either as an individual or as part of a group. Bearing in mind that you will not get the research funding for probably another year. Now, research funding is getting cut left, right and centre. I've been unsuccessful already this year with no feedback. So my grant application must just be amazing. I'm going to go with it. But, keep working on it. And I think there's something there that could be done. Equally, network. It's phenomenal to see so many of you here today. It really is. It's really heartwarming because it's very, very important to keep in touch with everybody, your peers. Again, people who can support you both professionally, but also personally as well. And that's where, again, UACES is crucial on this. But as Toni said, broaden your network as well. Be optimistic as well, I think is very, very important. And also be prepared to potentially wait a year. Most institutions are very likely to weather this storm. There has been a limited year of hiring, but I think they will be recruiting again. Universities are a lot more resilient than we think as institutions, and even kind of curveballs like COVID and like Brexit, things will, I'm quite positive about what we're seeing. And also think about kind of time away from academia. It can be useful to maybe gain new collaborations, participations for kind of future projects, prepare kind of more of an impact and knowledge base for your research. But I think if you do decide to do something like that and take some time away from academia, if you do want an academic job, the basic academic job descriptions will still apply. So again, publications, research. So it's a fine balance, but I think it's something that you could work to your advantage. And because again of remote working, it's something that again, I think we can all use to our advantage as well. And finally, there are kind of new roles within higher education. So there are increasingly new academic positions and career tracks that are more policy and kind of research work. And I think the time outside of academia might build that capacity and reputation for that type of work that could go on. So, to kind of sum up, optimism, it's not all doom and gloom. We can really get stuck in that cycle, but I think there are opportunities there. But equally, it is hard. It's easy for me to say it sitting here, but I think with a bit of creativity, you could really kind of carve out things in a better way. Thank you very much. I'll leave things there.
Thank you very much, Kathryn, and thanks to all of you for speaking so candidly. I think that's really refreshing on a panel like this to hear actual experiences from people, and not just platitudes like everything's going to be fine. Like encouragement from personal places is great.